I accept your nomination for President of the United States.
The last time Democrats held a convention, these were the scenes that greeted Hillary Clinton's historic nomination. 4 years later, the country is in the grips of the coronavirus pandemic that has largely confined big crowd events to the virtual arena.
It's, of course, an open question. Certainly in the 20th century, the nominating conventions are really not only a big business, so you have, of course, now the reverberations of all these local businesses, for example, in Milwaukee, not being able to take advantage of this. And then, of course, the spectacle. The whole thing here is really about the spectacle. Being in arenas, large crowds, enthusiastic crowds, and multi-day. So you sort of have a build-up to the very moment where the nomination of the president takes place.
Minus that kind of atmosphere in 2020, organizers are planning a made-for-television virtual event, with all the major US networks carrying it live for 2 hours each night, some celebrity, entertainment, and speeches from the who's who of the Democratic Party. Michelle Obama, Hillary Clinton, and their husbands, to mention a few. And with just 2.5 months before Election Day and a public health emergency in which over 170,000 Americans have died, the major issue shaping this election is clear.
It should come as no surprise that a major issue is, of course, going to be the coronavirus and how terribly the Trump administration has handled or bungled the coronavirus. And then, of course, the ramifications of that, which, of course, included the economy. So I don't think there's any question that is going to be a major factor. It's interesting to see that already the Republicans are trying to shift the issue away from the virus itself. In fact, Trump in his so-called press conferences now barely talks about the coronavirus, but indeed goes off on various diversions.
With growing alarm in the country at efforts from the president to undermine mail-in voting, which has grown in popularity due to the pandemic, and a post office wholly underfunded despite its growing centrality to this election.
I'll tell you who's meddling in our elections. The Democrats are meddling by wanting and insisting on sending mail-in ballots with this corruption all over the place.
Not so, according to this analyst.
It's outrageous. We've had mail-in voting since at least the Civil War. So, and it worked quite well in, the midst of perhaps the greatest emergency in U.S. history. I think that one needs to already consider that the presentation that Trump has made about contrasting mail-in voting as opposed to absentee ballots, and his, of course, claims about fraud aren't proven at all in terms of fraud. I think it's 0.001% is the corruption factor. It's not a factor at all.
With latest polling consistently showing Joe Biden with at least a 9-point lead nationally over the president, I asked Professor Brown if this was Biden's race to lose.
I wouldn't say that. I'm just going pessimistic by the number of times I've awakened the next morning or late that night, having not slept, to find out that my expectations have been completely undermined.
The convention will build up over 4 nights until Joe Biden accepts his party's nomination late on Thursday. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News, New York.